So this is about the seventh time I've tried to do this and do it right. So here we go. Hopefully last time's a charm. This is not my typical vlog. This is a vlog in response to a Facebook post that I posted and the responses that I received from it. The Facebook post that I posted was apparently written by a woman named Christy. Now, I don't know who this Christy is. I didn't even know that that's who it was. I just copied and shared what was already posted on one of my other friends' Facebook pages. And it was basically why I didn't march and why I don't agree with this march that took place after the election. In all fairness and all full disclosure, this vlog is going to be about politics and about religion. So if you didn't like me before, you're going to hate me by the end of this. But if you're going to defriend me and if you're going to unfollow me and whatever, I want you to know the full story, if you will listen, about why it is that I believe what I believe. So just for some context, there was a Facebook post, as I said, by a woman who apparently his name is Christy, that just outlined all the reasons why she did not march or did not feel that she needed to march. And the rebuttal response to that was written by a woman named Susan Spear, who wrote this entire rebuttal to Christy, which makes some assumptions about Christy's life and therefore by anybody who reposted Christy's post. So I am going to use my personal opinion, my personal history, to be able to explain what it is that I believe and why I've done what I've done. Now, throughout this entire election season, I have been quiet, mostly because a vast majority of my friends now are of a different political persuasion, shall we say, and so literally I went into hiding. I didn't want anybody to know who I voted for, not what my political persuasion was, which for an American history teacher was kind of hard because I was one of those soapbox people for many, many, many years. Many years. For somebody who lived out of the country and who was in Connecticut on 9/11, who had friends who were highly impacted by 9/11 and who drove past the, wow, really? Plume of smoke in New York after 9/11. And was in Washington after 9/11. That's my experiences. To put a little bit of perspective on this, I was a missionary in Brazil for 10 years. After being in college, I was in college, did some college, never finished, never graduated, wound up going to Brazil, and I was there for 10 years. So at that point, I was raising a son, which you'll hear about later, but I was raising a child, and I vastly remember having to get on the American Airlines plane that we were flying back to Brazil after 9/11, and I remember sitting down in that plane and looking up and seeing the American Airlines symbol on the bulkhead and lost it. Because all I could think about was what it was like for those parents, those moms of those babies who were on the plane on 9/11, and those babies who lost families. And that changed me significantly. I spent the next 4 years flying back and forth from Brazil, terrified every time, because we knew at that time that there were huge Al-Qaeda cells that were hiding out in Brazil that were specifically targeting Americans. So I was putting my life in my hands and my child's life in my hands every time we went back to Brazil. Now, for those of you who don't know, we have a home for street kids in Brazil, and those kids are like my family. So it was risking my life for my family and also just trusting that God had my back because there was nothing I could do. I knew that's what I was called to do. But it changed me. And I finally got to the point where just after 10 years, I needed to make a change, wound up coming back to the United States. Because of that, George Bush's election meant everything to me. He was my president because he's the one that got me through 9/11, and that's why I felt so strongly about that. So I get where a lot of you guys are coming from in this election. I get it. I totally do, because 8 years ago, I felt the same way. I honestly felt that everything that we had done to be able to protect this country and to protect American assets throughout the world were going to be jeopardized. That the military, that I so highly support, was going to be jeopardized. And that was my fear. So I get it. I get where you're coming from. I get that place of fear. However, my basic premise is, give the guy a chance. He's been in office less than 24 hours, and you're protesting someone who has literally not had the opportunity to be in the office for more than an hour. So to protest that seems a little absurd. Susan Spear assumes right off the bat is that Christy, whoever she is an affluent white woman. I can assure you, I am far from an affluent woman. And I'm maybe white, but I'm actually Russian, Romanian, Polish, Irish, and French. I am third generation American. My great-grandparents, all on both sides of my family, came over on the boat, some of them escaping the harsh realities of World War II in Europe. Oh, did I also mention they were Jewish? Dad's family is Jewish, and my mom's side of the family is Irish Catholic. My parents eventually wound up becoming Christians, and as I said, my dad became a minister. So that's my background, full disclosure. My parents separated when I was 7. My dad is the one who wound up taking care of me, or who wound up getting custody, and eventually wound up moving to Florida, and my dad made a whole lot of sacrifices as a single dad, which I now understand as a single mom. But one of those was to be able to get me to a private Christian school from which I graduated. Now, when I first went there in 7th grade, again, my dad was just coming out of 24 months of unemployment, for which he had never received help from the government because he was a male in the late 70s, early 90s, and a male single parent does not really have rights. So I get the voice not being heard thing. Ridiculed for my hair because it was incredibly frizzy. I was called tornado head, which still sends shivers up my spine. We couldn't afford the uniforms. I was 4 months without uniforms at that school and was made fun of pretty much every day for the fact that I didn't wear a uniform. Finally, the school said, you have to wear a uniform if you're coming here. But they helped us out because they had something called a uniform bank where I could go and get used uniforms in an incredibly affluent school so that I could have more things to be ridiculed about because I couldn't afford Keds or a Gucci purse or Guess jeans. It was awesome. Really good. But, and then in 8th grade, my dad decided to make the choice to vote for Walter Mondale over Ronald Reagan. Also doesn't really fly in a affluent, white, Christian Republican school. So I was ridiculed for that for a really long time. So I get it. I've been on the other side. I totally get it. Yeah, I know what it's like to have your voice not heard because that's how I felt. Now, I'm going to also preempt this by saying my guy is not the guy that's in the White House right now. That was not who I was voting for. But I wound up having no choices. I was between a rock and a hard place, and so I listened at both conventions, and not necessarily to the candidates themselves, but to the people who spoke on behalf of the candidates, and that's what really swayed my opinion. So yes, I'm going to say here and now, I voted for Trump. Sorry, I did. So with all that being said, let me tell you the rest. Yes, I understand what it's like not to be heard because I have not been heard, not only when I was young, but now as well, in just recent past few years. One of the things that Susan Spear mentions is, great, Christy, you feel like you have control over your own body. And then she goes into this story about how she wound up having to pay, was going to have to pay $1,000 for an IUD. Well, let me put it this way. I do very much know what it feels like to not have control over my own body, without a doubt. But in terms of her stating that she was going to have to pay $1,000 for an IUD because of the males that were in power, blah, 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 I want to point something out. Donald Trump has been in office for less than 24 hours. So the fact that you, a few years ago, had to pay over $1,000 for an IUD has nothing to do with Donald Trump. She states, have you ever skipped an annual pelvic or mammogram because your kid needed new shoes and you had to hope for the best? Well, yes. So, I was a teacher for many, many years. And I never wound up getting my degree because I taught in Brazil, and then I came back and I taught in a private school. And because I was raised by two teachers who were incredibly good and taught in a school in Brazil, that was pretty much enough. And I have a lot of education. I just never finished my degree. So after I wound up leaving that teaching job and decided to go back to school, I was able to get government health care. And not only that, but I was also able to go on food stamps, which was one of the most humiliating things I have ever had to do in my life. I was literally sitting in this disgusting, dirty office with hundreds and thousands of people and realized this is my lowest point and just cried because I couldn't provide for my kid. And it was the first time that I was at my wit's end. I couldn't do it. I didn't have the money. I didn't know what to be able to do. So I went, and in the state of Kentucky, they were like, yep, here you go. So I wound up getting health care. My son wound up getting health care. And we wound up getting food stamps. And I was like, thank God, I can do this. All right, we got it. And so I was able to go to school. I was working part-time. I had catering, just did whatever I could. But I had a child that I had to bring to and from school because there were no buses to the schools that he was going to. And I was putting him through private school because I felt that that's what was best for him. When Obamacare kicked in, I lost my health care coverage because I was making more than $268 a month. I was making $800, and my rent was $695. If I hadn't had the help of my then fiance and my parents, I probably would have been on the streets, quite honestly. I don't know what I would have done. There's no way I could have done it. And I told them they were crazy and there was nothing I could do. What were my options? And she's like, well, you can just ask for a tax exemption and tell them that you don't want to be penalized because you couldn't afford it. That's great. What do I do if I need health care? Well, you can go to a walk-in clinic. I don't know if any of you guys have ever been to one of those walk-in clinics, but they are absolutely horrific. And one of my other lowest points was having to bring my son in for his inoculations to one of those clinics and him going into basically a seizure in the midst of that. So yeah, I get what it's like not to have health care. I have only in the last 6 months received health care again. So I have been over 3.5 years without a pelvic or a mammogram. In fact, I never got a mammogram, and I have breast cancer on every side of my family, so it terrified me every night. Now she goes on to say, have you ever been sexually assaulted, shoved around by a drunk boyfriend, felt unsafe around someone? If so, did you have control of your own body then? I woke up in the middle of the night with a knife to my throat. And 9 months later, I was given the greatest gift of my life, my son. So yes, I get that. In college, I had an incredibly, incredibly abusive boyfriend, and wound up with bruises and scars and marks all over, a broken sternum because of the boyfriend that I had. So yeah, I get what it's like to not be in control of your own body. You say you can go out and get a job if you want. Well, I couldn't just get any job. In fact, when we moved here to Orlando, my son was hired by the next day that we arrived, and it took me almost 3.5 to 4 months before I finally wound up getting a job, regardless of the fact that by then I had finished my degree in psychology. I now have the job of a lifetime. It is a dream job, but it's not paying what I should be worth by the time I'm 45 years old. So yeah, I know what it's like to just not be able to go out and get a job either. You say you can vote. That is true. I can vote. And when I lived in Brazil, we had to travel a day to be able to get to the embassy, to be able to write in our vote. So I know how difficult it can be to vote. You say you feel heard. Health coverage was taken away and there was nothing I could do about it. I fought, I did everything that I could, and not only did I not have health coverage, but I was told that I was going to have to pay a penalty because I did not have health coverage. I wanted health coverage. I wanted to be able to have the security to be able to go and continue my annual exams, but I could not do that because I didn't have health coverage. To add to that, go one step further, while I was a student and working part-time and doing every odd job I possibly could. I was a nanny for a family who I dearly love, who, thank God, are the blessing in my life that bought me a car, because without that, we wouldn't even have transportation at this point. I was told that I was going to have a 40-hour-a-week job, even though I was in school as a full-time student for 40 hours, because if not, I was going to lose my food stamps. And I quickly said, wait a minute, so if I was unemployed, doing nothing, and kicking out kids one after the other, then I could have food stamps? And she quickly responded, she being my caseworker, don't even get me started. The system's broken. That was not under Donald Trump. That was in the last 8 years. Point 9, the only person who can stop you is yourself. Because of the decisions I made, 100%. I volunteered for 10 years in Brazil. Because of that, I never was able to finish my college degree, and I came back and worked every possible job that I could as a secretary, as whatever else, as finally wound up being able to get a teacher. So I understand what it's like to be the person who stops you. I was very frustrated with myself because of decisions I had made, but I also wouldn't have gone back, and I knew that something eventually was going to wind up working out. And so I did. Myself and a whole bunch of my other friends wound up going back to school and finishing our degrees. And you know what I'm doing with my degree right now? Zip, zilch, nada. But I have a whole lot of student loans to be able to pay back now, even though I'm doing nothing with my degree. I get it. I completely get it. And what about all the horrible things that happened to the women in Pakistan, Mali, and Guatemala? And then she goes on to talk about there's broken people here in the United States. I 100% agree. I 100% agree, but I guarantee you that any one of those women in Pakistan, in Mali, in Guatemala, in Africa would give anything to be able to change places with just one of those women who feel like they have no rights here in the United States. And I know that because I know our kids who come to Brazil, and when we take them to the slums of New York or Chicago, would say, I, in a heartbeat, would trade where I live in Brazil for this. So what we have in America is 1,000 times better than what anybody else has in another country, and that is what makes this country so amazing. So that brings me to the march. So she's saying that she represents all the people who don't have a voice. Well, this is my voice. This is why I didn't march. I didn't march because it's not about what Donald Trump did. He hasn't done anything. And what he has done has been more in the past 48 hours than any president I've ever seen in my life. And for those of you who are terrified of the immigration reform, my brother is Brazilian. He's here on a visa. He's not an American citizen. My other brother is here on a green card. He also is not an American citizen. People who I dearly love are not fully American citizens, but they're also not the drug cartel. And Donald Trump's plan, at least what he said, and the reason that I am 100% behind him is because the people who are working and doing and have brought their families and trying to get them into this country, those are not the people he's going after. It's the people who have been arrested multiple times for killing and being involved in gangs and drugs. Those are the people, and terrorism. Those are the people that he's number one targeting, not you guys. So relax. It's gonna be okay. In the meantime, go try to get legal. It's pretty easy. And by the way, my guy that I was gonna vote for, well, was Marco Rubio. He is an immigrant. His parents were immigrants. He is the son of full-on immigrant families. And I'm also going to remind you that your first lady is an immigrant. And as a final note, not in rebuttal to what Susan Spears said, But in direct response to what was posted directly to me, one of my friends was very concerned because she has friends who were sexually assaulted and those people got off on charges because, quote unquote, boys will be boys. One, I will say congratulations, because at the very least, it was in this country and not in a foreign country where it's not even considered rape. Two, I just want to remind you that you might want to do a little bit of fact checking, because there was a story, no, it wasn't a story, there was an actual factual reality of a 13-year-old girl in New York who was brutally raped by a series of much older men in their 20s. And they found the guys. There was undeniable physical evidence that absolutely these are the men who raped this girl. And those guys wound up getting off. The reason they got off was because the prosecutor told the judge and everyone else and was able to manipulate that court proceedings so much that she convinced everyone that the girl actually had set it all up and was asking, quote unquote, asking for it, that she had fantasized about this. And just so you know who that person was, that is the woman that you guys were going to vote for, Hillary Clinton. So honestly, I feel much better with a man in office who clearly loves his wife, loves his kids, loves his ex-wives, and have that man in office than a woman who, regardless of whatever her legal obligation was, got those guys off. Because being a woman who has been in that position, I definitely would have preferred to have anyone be by my side to make sure that those guys fried regardless, because I wasn't asking for it either. So, with that, I end. So please, feel free. You can unfriend me. You can unfollow me. You can do whatever you want. Those are just my opinions. That's my history. But I'm just going to say, I love you guys. God bless you. Please give him a chance. And God bless America.